Lots of people say Spanish is easy.
It is easy.
Si hablas español entonces.
No puedo hablar.
If you want to take your Spanish from chump to champ, this is the right video for you. Because we're covering everything from grammar to profanity, so we can make sure we never end up like that guy. Spanish is definitely a lot more predictably phonetic than English ever will be. My god, it only has 5 vowels. A, E, I, O, U. Where have you been all my life? But the consonants are a tad bit more complicated than you've been led to believe. First, let's start simple. Baca, baca. In Spanish, B and V are the same sound, which you've probably already heard about. But those two are a part of a group of letters that change based on where they are in a word. At the start of a phrase or after certain consonants, they're hard. Beso, dame, gato. But between vowels, they relax. Bebé, dedo, agua. And I do mean if it's between any 2 vowels. Vaca, la vaca, gato. Ese gato. For whatever reason, Spanish speakers often tell me that there is no difference. Remember to always wear your tinfoil hat around native speakers of any language because they have the habit of thinking things are simpler than they really are. But the truth is out there. Now, how about we look at some digraphs? Cha, like in English. This is the letter Ñ, but it used to be written as double N. The reason why there's a squiggly line there is because that's where the second N went. It makes a Ñ sound, like Ña. And this is its direct counterpart. It used to be called Elle, and that's how it was read. But nowadays, to the absolute majority of Spanish speakers, it's merged with ye. Pollo, pollo. In Argentina and Uruguay, and get used to them being the exception to everything, the sounds not only merged, but changed. Initially to je, but nowadays it's sh, at least to porteños. Shamsha no sabe cuánto yo brillo. But that's not where the regional differences end. The most recognizable trait of peninsular Spanish is the way Castilians pronounce these 2 letters. Cerveza, zapatos. There's this really annoying myth I keep hearing that a 14th century Spanish king had a lisp and everyone had to copy him so he didn't feel bad. That is absolutely wrong. In Old Spanish, when these 2 letters were in front of an E or an E, they made a Z and Ts sound. Over time, they merged into just a Ts sound, and eventually they flattened out into a Th. Do bear in mind, though, that this is an Iberian exclusive. In Latin America, all 3 of these letters are pronounced as S. Jota varies, but generally it's a Ch or a H sound depending on where you are. That's laughter. They're making fun of me. What normally makes the G sound and the R sound also makes a H sound like Jota if it's followed by E or E. If you want to write ge or gi, you're gonna have to put an U between the 2 and not pronounce it. Unless you see this letter, in which case you do pronounce it, like in pingüino. Los pingüinos me la van a mascar. Same goes for these 2. It's que and a qui, not que and qui. What did you think this was? Italian? Te amo, pero te amo, perro. The first one sounds tragically romantic. The second one, don't say that to your girlfriend. That's because the Spanish letter R makes 2 different sounds depending on where it is in a word, and they're not interchangeable. And finally, the most difficult, dare I say impossible, phonetic particularity for my English-speaking friends to follow. H isn't pronounced. Stop saying hablo, please.
La verdad, no tengo ni idea de por qué estás aquí. Vives una vida relativamente normal.
O sea, I literally don't understand tampoco. Yo siempre fui super chill, you know?
Olvídalo, estás en el lugar correcto.
I think it would be an understatement to say that Spanish verbs are difficult, because they're a lot more than difficult. However, I'm gonna break it down and make it easy because that's just the kind of guy I am. Verbs represent actions, but in Spanish they also tell you who did it and when it happened. Spanish likes to avoid pronouns as much as possible, which makes the majority of these verbs incredibly predictable. And the ones that aren't predictable are going to be some of the first words you learn anyway. I don't think I need to explain what function present and future fulfill, but the past is where things get a little bit more complicated. Pretérito is for actions that happened in the past and finished, while its counterpart is utilized for actions that were ongoing in the past, happening habitually. The conditional is used to say what would happen if a specific set of conditions were met. And it also happens to turn tyrannical demands into polite requests. All of those verbs we just covered are grouped together under the indicative mood, or the verbs we use to talk about facts. There are 2 more, starting with the imperative, which is used to impotently bark commands at people who don't care and are not going to follow them.
Conjuga los verbos, insecto!
Whoops, I got a little emotional, which actually segues into our next point, the subjunctive. If a sentence contains any doubt, emotion, abstract desire, or uncertainty, you are no longer stating an objective fact. So Spanish forces you to change the verb in order to signal that. It's split into tenses, like the ones we already explained earlier, but the future isn't really used anymore outside of writing. All this conjugation might look a bit excessive, but it's actually genius. Multiple words? Inefficient. One word? Super efficient. How awesome is that, right? Oh, no. Well, we can take this opportunity to explain that reflexive verbs are used to describe actions performed on oneself. The lines I cross to teach you. Spanish nouns come in two genders, feminine like handcuffs, and masculine like El Super Saiyajin Legendario! The ending of the word usually tells you which gender it is. To make a word and its respective article plural, all you have to do is add S at the end. Oh, that's beautiful. For the record, adjectives come after the noun and must match it in gender and pluralization. If you want to terrorize native speakers of Spanish, tell them things like El Blanco Dragón, El Blanco Dragón, El Blanco Dragón. It sounds horrible. Here's another public service announcement. English has a lot of words that sound like Spanish words, but don't mean the same thing at all. I have heard multiple real people say, soy embarazado. You just implied you're a man in a permanent state of pregnancy. Pronouns are another part of the Spanish system that is partially fractured by region. The second-person pronouns tú and vosotros are strictly informal. If you want to address your boss or a group of bosses, you must use the formal usted and ustedes. You also need to address the person with third-person verbs. Ooh. But if you're in Latin America, good news. You can forget about vosotros. It has been entirely absorbed by ustedes, which now pulls double duty for both formal and informal groups. There's one final exception, and guess who it applies to? In Argentina and Uruguay, the traditional pronoun tú has been completely replaced by the pronoun vos. Normally, this would just be a short footnote, but it actually has its own conjugation pattern. It's vosotros minus the final E. Before we move on to the coveted profanity section, one last thing. In English, pronouns have different forms based on what function they fulfill in a sentence. Spanish has this too. You normally drop these you use for whoever is affected by the verb, these you use when you give something to someone, and you use these with prepositions. Disrespect is a universal concept, so don't call your Mexican friend a Castilian swear word hoping he doesn't understand. Of course he knows what you said, it's his native language, he just wouldn't phrase it that way. There are some universal curse words, so we're going to start by power scaling them. Like your basic scatological exclamation, the related verb, and their natural origin point. It's all low-tier stuff. It's weak. Then you cross into a slightly more powerful tier because it's personal and it's descriptive. You're bad, you're dumb, or you're a goat. But that one varies by region. It's fine in Mexico, and it's a terrible idea in Spain. Finally, if you really want your power level to skyrocket, drop this phrase. You better know how to fight, though, because you just said that guy's mother belongs to the oldest profession in the world, and newsflash, she probably doesn't.
Pide perdón.
That whole list I gave you is nothing compared to the regional expressions. Colombia, for instance, completely bypasses the power scale and goes directly for calling you, oh my god, badly born? Yes, that's an exclamation. Yes, it's also an STI. Hey, do you remember the forbidden phrase from earlier that I told you to never say? What if we fused it into one word? This verb, which means to copulate, and its many derivatives, carry a special status in Mexican cursing culture. As a matter of fact, it's so pervasive that a Nobel laureate wrote about its philosophical implications, and I know that was a sentence you did not expect to hear. If you'd like to be even more authentically Mexican in your swearing, remember to add this adjective, and if you're brave, direct everything at the other person's mother.
Tu madre, oh, no, I was kidding!
Argentinians like to use what I can only describe as the most unintentionally hilarious insults you'll be hearing today. The shell of the parrot? Your mother's shell? It implies exactly what you think it does. Pelotudo is used to insult someone's intelligence, but we're gonna have to have a quick gander at its etymology to really understand the meaning. Pelota means ball, but the suffix implies that it is attached to a person and massive. Its literal definition would be one who is rendered slow by their massive set. Spain has a few iconic expressions, but one in particular demands to be addressed. Spaniards have the strange habit of saying I defecate on blank, with blank being any number of things. That wouldn't be a problem if its most frequent targets weren't the communion host, the Virgin Mary, God himself. Thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing if you've done so. I've been your host, Plasticine Heart, and 2 weeks from now, hopefully, magically, a Brazilian Portuguese video will appear on this channel.